What happens when a single piece of forgotten jewelry becomes the thread that unravels a tapestry of lies spanning 3 decades? What if the woman pouring coffee in a roadside diner was actually the lost heir to a fortune built on secrets that powerful people would kill to protect? For Rebecca, Becca Parker, a 27-year-old waitress fighting to keep her foster mother's farm from foreclosure in rural Tennessee, that moment of recognition came on a sweltering summer evening when she served sweet tea to a woman whose ornate hairpin would unlock a family mystery worth dying for. But one humid July night, a glittering emerald would set fire to secrets that had been smoldering for 29 years. The ceiling fans of Mama Belle's roadhouse barely stirred the thick Tennessee air as the dinner crowd thinned to a handful of truckers and locals. Rebecca Parker wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, her uniform clinging to her skin after another 14-hour shift. At 27, she'd been waiting tables for nearly a decade, ever since her foster mother Dorothy had mortgaged the family farm to pay for experimental cancer treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Through the screen door, she could see fireflies beginning their nightly dance in the kudzu-covered fields, but there was no romance in the scene for Becca. Tomorrow, the bank would come for another payment they couldn't make, and she was running out of miracles to keep Dorothy's land in the family. The bell above the door chimed as a sleek black sedan pulled into the gravel lot. From it emerged a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, probably 50-something, with perfectly styled auburn hair and clothes that whispered money rather than shouting it. She moved with the practiced grace of someone born to privilege, her designer heels clicking against the worn linoleum as she chose a booth near the window. Becca grabbed a glass of sweet tea and approached with her tired smile. "Evening, ma'am. Welcome to Mama Belle's. Can I get you started with something?" The woman looked up from her phone with the kind of polite but distant expression that suggested she wasn't used to places like this. "Thank you, dear. Just the tea for now, and perhaps you could recommend something light. I'm not terribly hungry." Her voice carried the cultured tones of old Southern money, not the nouveau riche drawl of Nashville celebrities, but the refined accent of families whose names appeared on courthouse cornerstones and hospital wings. "Our chicken salad is real. Popular," Becca offered. "Made fresh this morning with pecans from our own trees." "That sounds lovely." As Becca turned to go, the woman raised her hand to adjust her hair, and Becca caught sight of an ornate hairpin that made her breath catch. In her throat, it was extraordinary. White gold formed into delicate vines and leaves with a centerpiece that took Becca's breath away. At its heart sat an emerald the size of a dime, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the diner's fluorescent lights like captured starlight. But it wasn't the obvious expense that stopped Becca cold. It was the design. She'd seen it before. Not in person, but in the faded photograph that Dorothy kept in her jewelry box, the one picture her foster mother had of Becca's birth mother. In that photo, a young woman with Becca's eyes and smile wore an identical hairpin, down to the smallest detail of its vine pattern. "Excuse me," Becca heard herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. "That hairpin, it's beautiful. Is it an antique?" The woman's perfectly manicured hand moved instinctively to touch the piece, her expression shifting from polite interest to something sharper, more guarded. "Yes, it's been in my family for generations." "Why do you ask?" Becca's heart hammered against her ribs. "My mother, my birth mother, she had one just like it. I've never seen another one like it anywhere." The woman's blue eyes narrowed slightly, studying Becca's face with sudden intensity. "That's impossible. This piece was custom-made for my great-grandmother in 1952. The jeweler created only one." "But there has to be another," Becca insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I have a photograph." "I think you're mistaken, dear," the woman interrupted, her tone cooling noticeably. "Perhaps what you saw was a reproduction, or your memory has played tricks on you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a slim wallet, extracting two $50 bills and placing them on the table. It was far more than the cost of sweet tea and chicken salad. "I'm afraid I'm not as hungry as I thought," she said, standing gracefully. "Keep the change for your trouble." As she moved toward the door, Becca found her voice. "Wait, please. What's your name?" The woman paused at the threshold, her hand on the screen door. When she turned back, her expression was unreadable. "Margaret Whitmore," she said. "And you are?" "Rebecca Parker. But my birth name was—" "I wouldn't concern myself with birth names if I were you, dear," Margaret interrupted, her voice carrying a subtle warning. "Sometimes the past is better left buried." The door closed behind her with a soft chime, leaving Becca standing in the empty diner with the echo of her words and a growing certainty that her carefully ordered world was about to implode. Becca didn't sleep that night. She sat on the sagging porch of Dorothy's farmhouse, staring at the faded photograph in her hands. In the yellowed image, a young woman who could have been Becca's twin smiled at the camera, the emerald hairpin glittering in her dark hair. On the back, in Dorothy's careful script, was written Rebecca Ann Whitmore, age 19, 1995. Whitmore, the same name as the woman in the diner. Becca had always known she was adopted, or rather, taken in by Dorothy, when she was 3 years old after what Dorothy described only as a terrible tragedy. There had been no official paperwork, no social workers, just a scared little girl who'd needed a home and a childless woman who'd opened her heart. But Dorothy had always been vague about the details. Becca's parents had died in an accident. She'd said there were no other relatives. The photograph and a small inheritance, now long spent on farm expenses, were all that remained of Becca's previous life. Now, faced with Margaret Whitmore's absolute certainty that no other hairpin existed, Becca began to question everything she'd been told. Dorothy was sleeping fitfully in the next room, her breathing labored from the emphysema that was slowly stealing her life. At 78, she was fragile, perhaps too fragile for the kind of shocking revelations that might emerge from this mystery. Yet Becca couldn't shake the feeling that Dorothy knew more than she'd ever admitted. As dawn broke over the rolling hills, Becca made a decision. She called in sick to work, something she'd never done, and drove to the Clarksville Public Library, where she spent the day researching the Whitmore family online. What she found painted a picture of staggering wealth and influence spanning 5 generations. The Whitmores had built their fortune on textile mills and tobacco farms in the 1800s, then diversified into banking, real estate, and politics. They owned half of downtown Nashville, had senators and governors in their family. Tree and their charitable foundation was one of the largest in the South. The current patriarch was Charles Whitmore III, Margaret's husband, whose business empire stretched across 3 states. But the deeper Becca dug, the more she found whispers of scandal carefully managed and suppressed. Accusations of worker exploitation that disappeared from court records, environmental violations that resulted in mysteriously light fines, business rivals who suffered convenient bankruptcies or tragic accidents. She found several references to family members, including Margaret Whitmore née Caldwell, who'd married into the family in 1971, but there was a gap in the family tree that intrigued her, a missing branch that seemed to have been deliberately removed from public records. Then she found it, a single obituary from August 1998, buried in the archives of a small weekly newspaper. Rebecca Ann Whitmore, 22, died tragically in an automobile accident along with her husband, David Parker, 24. Mrs. Whitmore Parker was the daughter of Charles and Margaret Whitmore and is survived. by her infant daughter. Becca stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Rebecca Ann Whitmore Parker. Her birth mother hadn't just shared her first name, they were the same person, and David Parker. That was where her surname had come from. The obituary was brief, almost dismissive. No details about the accident, no mention of a funeral, no indication of what had happened to the surviving infant daughter. It was as if the Whitmore family had wanted to erase their daughter's existence as quickly and quietly as possible. That evening, Becca sat beside Dorothy's bed in their small farmhouse, the library printouts spread on the patchwork quilt. Her foster mother was awake but tired, her breathing aided by the oxygen concentrator that had become a permanent fixture in the room. "Dorothy," Becca began gently, "I need to ask you about something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Dorothy's faded blue eyes sharpened slightly. "What is it, honey?" Becca showed her the obituary. "This woman, Rebecca Ann Whitmore Parker, she was my mother, wasn't she?" A flicker of fear crossed Dorothy's weathered face. She struggled to sit up, her hands gripping the bedsheets with surprising strength. "Where did you find this?" "At the library. Dorothy, her last name was Parker. That's where my name came from. And the Whitmores, they're one of the wealthiest families in Tennessee." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears, and for a long moment she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I always knew this day would come. Tell me the truth, please." Dorothy reached for Becca's hand with fingers that felt like dry leaves. "Your mama didn't die in any car accident, honey. That's just what they told people." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Becca felt the world spinning around her. "She came to me in the middle of the night," Dorothy continued, her voice growing stronger as the truth finally spilled out. "You were just 6 months old. She was beaten, terrified, running from something terrible. She said her own family was trying to kill her. The Whitmores. But why? Your daddy wasn't suitable, she said. David Parker was a good man, an honest man, but he wasn't from their kind of family. They'd married in secret, and when you were born..." Dorothy's voice trailed off. "What happened to them?" Dorothy's grip tightened. 3 days after she brought you to me, they found their car at the bottom of Miller's Creek. Both of them drowned, they said. But your mama was a champion swimmer. Honey, she'd grown up on that creek. The revelation was staggering. Becca's entire life had been built on a lie, a necessary lie designed to keep her alive. But now that Margaret Whitmore knew she existed, how long before that protection crumbled? "The hairpin," Becca whispered, "in the photograph. Your mama said it was proof of who you were, proof of your birthright. She said if anything happened to her, I should give you the picture when you came of age and tell you to find someone named Robert Chen." "Who's Robert Chen?" "I don't know," Dorothy admitted. "But she said he was the only person who could help you claim what was rightfully yours. She said he'd been trying to help them escape." 20 miles away, in a mansion, overlooking the Cumberland River, Margaret Whitmore stood in her husband's study, her hands shaking as she held a secure phone. Charles Whitmore III sat behind his massive oak desk, his face grave as he listened to the conversation. "She described the hairpin perfectly," Margaret was saying. "Every detail. It's her, Charles. It's Rebecca's daughter." "Are you certain?" "She looks exactly like Rebecca did at that age. Same eyes, same smile. And she said her birth name was Rebecca. That can't be a coincidence." Charles leaned back in his leather chair, his mind racing. "After all these years, we thought she was dead. The Parker woman must have lied. She must have kept the child instead of..." Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. "Instead of disposing of her as we paid her to do," Charles completed coldly. "It seems Dorothy Parker developed a conscience." Margaret began pacing, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors. What do we do? The girl is asking questions, showing interest in the family. If she starts digging, she'll find out about Rebecca, about the real circumstances of her death, about the inheritance. Charles stood and walked to a wall safe, retrieving a thick file. Rebecca's will left everything to her daughter. 5% of Whitmore Holdings, worth approximately $50 million at current valuations. We can't let her claim it. The board of directors, the shareholders, they'd ask questions about where she's been, why we never acknowledged her existence. They'd discover we murdered their daughter and her husband, Charles said matter-of-factly. No, Margaret. The girl has become a liability, just like her parents were. Margaret stopped pacing, her face pale. You're talking about killing a child. I'm talking about protecting our family's legacy, Charles corrected. Call Marcus Webb. Tell him we have a situation that requires his specialized services. Charles, she's Rebecca's daughter. She's our granddaughter. She's a bastard. Child who threatens everything we've built. His voice hardened. Rebecca made her choice when she defied us, when she married that nobody and thought she could steal from the family. Now her daughter will pay the price for her mother's mistakes. As Margaret reluctantly dialed the number, Charles returned to his safe and retrieved another item, a small jewelry box containing a matching set to the emerald hairpin. It had been Rebecca's inheritance from her grandmother, split into 2 pieces so that one day she could pass them on to her own daughter. Of course, Rebecca had never gotten the chance, and if Charles had his way, neither would her child. The next morning brought news that made Becca's blood run cold. She arrived at the diner to find police cars in the parking lot and her manager, Bill Thompson, speaking in hushed tones with 2 deputies. Becca, thank God you're here, Bill said when he saw her. There was a break-in last night. They didn't take anything from the register, but they tore up the office pretty good. Becca's heart sank as she realized what they'd been looking for. Did they get into the employee files? Made a real mess of them. Listen, if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm not, Becca lied. Probably just kids looking for easy money. But she knew better. The Whitmores had decided she was a threat, and they were moving to eliminate that threat. She had to find Robert Chen, whoever he was, before their people found her. She spent her lunch break at the library again, searching for any connection between Robert Chen and the Whitmore family. What she found surprised her. Robert Chen wasn't a lawyer or business associate. He was a private investigator and former FBI agent who specialized in financial crimes and missing persons cases. More importantly, according to his website, he'd spent 20 years investigating corporate corruption before going private. And according to newspaper archives, he'd been working on a case involving the Whitmore family in the late 1990s, right around the time Becca's parents had died. She called his office from a payphone outside the library. Chen Investigations, came a crisp voice. Mr. Chen, my name is Rebecca Parker. I think you knew my parents, Rebecca and David Parker. There was a long pause on the other end. When? Chen spoke again. His voice had changed completely. Jesus Christ, after all these years, where are you? Clarksville, Tennessee. Don't move. Don't go home. Don't trust anyone. I'll be there in 4 hours. His voice was urgent, fearful. Rebecca, if you're calling me, it means they know you're alive, and that means you're in immediate danger. Robert Chen was a compact man in his 60s, with graying hair and the watchful eyes of someone who'd seen too much. He found Becca at a truck stop diner 20 miles from her home, and without a word, gestured for her to follow him to a corner booth where they couldn't be overheard. "Show me the photograph," he said without preamble. Becca slid the picture across the table. Chen's expression grew grim as he studied the image of her mother wearing the emerald hairpin. "I helped your father take this picture," he said softly. "It was supposed to be evidence in our case against the Whitmores. You were investigating them? For 3 years. Financial fraud, tax evasion, money laundering. Charles Whitmore was running a criminal enterprise disguised as a legitimate business. Your father was our inside source. Chen pulled out his phone and showed Becca a photograph from the 1990s, a younger version of himself standing beside a man who looked remarkably like Becca, and a woman she now recognized as her mother. David Parker was an accountant at Whitmore Holdings, Chen explained. He'd discovered evidence of systematic fraud and came to the FBI. We'd been building a case for months when he met your mother. And she helped him? Rebecca was the key to everything. As Charles Whitmore's daughter, she had access to financial records and family documents that David couldn't reach. Together, they gathered enough evidence to bring down the entire organization. What happened? Chen's face darkened. Charles found out. He had your father killed first, made it look like a random mugging gone wrong. But your mother escaped with you and our evidence files. For 3 weeks I helped her stay hidden while we tried to figure out how to protect you both. But they found her. She made a deal with them, said she'd turn over all our evidence in exchange for your safety. We begged her not to trust them, but she was desperate to protect you. So they killed her anyway. The car accident was staged. Charles never intended to honor any deal with his own daughter. He took our evidence and had her murdered, along with your father's body, to make it look like they died together. Becca's mind raced. Then how did I escape? Because your mother was smarter than Charles gave her credit for. She made copies of everything and hid them before she went to meet him. And she'd already made arrangements with Dorothy Parker, David's aunt, to keep you safe until you were old enough to claim your inheritance. You're saying there's still evidence, after all these years? Your mother hid it in the one place Charles would never think to look. Chen reached over and gently touched the photograph. This isn't just a keepsake, Rebecca, it's a map. He showed her tiny markings on the back of the photo that she'd never noticed. Coordinates written in nearly invisible ink. Your inheritance isn't just money, Chen said. It's the power to destroy the people who killed your parents. The coordinates led to a storage unit in Nashville. The rental fees automatically paid from a trust fund Becca's mother had established before her death. Inside the climate-controlled unit was a treasure trove of evidence. Financial records documenting decades of fraud and money laundering, recorded conversations revealing bribes and threats, photographs of document destruction and witness intimidation. But the most damning evidence was a video recording made just days before her parents' deaths. In it, they sat together in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," David said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes, "it means Charles and Margaret succeeded in killing us. But it also means our daughter survived, and she's old enough to learn the truth about her family." Rebecca leaned forward, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Becca, we want you to know that you were conceived in love and born into hope. Your father tried to stop the Whitmores from destroying innocent families with their greed. When legal methods failed, we chose justice over safety." The video continued for another hour, detailing evidence and providing context for the financial documents. By the end, Becca was crying. Not just for the parents she'd never known, but for the 24 years of lies that had shaped her life. "What do we do now?" she asked Chen. "We finish what your parents started," he replied grimly. "But we have to move fast. Charles and Margaret know you're alive, and they won't hesitate to kill you like they killed your parents." As if summoned by their words, Chen's phone rang. He answered it with a frown that quickly turned to alarm. "What? When?" "Dear God, we'll be right there." He hung up and turned to Becca, his face ashen. "That was the hospital. Dorothy Parker was found unconscious in her home this morning. Carbon monoxide poisoning. They're saying it was an accident, but..." Becca felt her world collapse. Dorothy was all the family she'd ever known, and now the Whitmores had tried to murder her just to send a message. "This ends now," Becca said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of running. It's time for the truth to come out." "Rebecca, you don't understand the kind of power we're dealing with." "I understand perfectly," Becca interrupted. "My grandparents are murderers who've been covering their crimes for decades, but they made one mistake. They let me live long enough to find out who I really am." The annual Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala was Tennessee's premier social event, attracting politicians, business leaders, and celebrities from across the South. The theme this year was family values, and Charles Whitmore was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award for his philanthropic contributions. Working with Chen, Becca had spent weeks preparing. They'd made copies of all the evidence and distributed them to journalists, FBI agents, and federal prosecutors across multiple states. But Becca wanted more than just justice. She wanted Charles and Margaret to face their crimes in front of the people who'd enabled them for decades. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of Nashville's Hermitage Hotel, a glittering showcase of Southern high society. Becca arrived wearing a simple black dress she'd borrowed from a thrift store, her mother's emerald hairpin, retrieved from Dorothy's jewelry box, glittering in her dark hair. She looked nothing like the society debutantes who filled the room, but she carried herself with inherited grace and newfound purpose. She made her way through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments. At the center of it all stood Charles and Margaret Whitmore, resplendent in formal wear, accepting congratulations for their latest charitable initiative. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and Becca saw the exact moment when recognition dawned. In Margaret's face, the older woman's hand flew to her throat, her face going pale as she whispered something to her husband. Charles Whitmore turned, his cold blue eyes scanning the crowd until they found Becca. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then he smiled, a predatory expression that sent chills down Becca's spine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles announced, tapping his champagne flute to call for attention, "I'd like to introduce someone very special who's joined us tonight. My granddaughter Rebecca, who's been away from the family for far too long." The room fell silent. Becca had planned to make a dramatic entrance, to expose them before they could react. Instead, Charles had turned the tables, presenting her as a beloved family member, trying to control the narrative. "Hello, grandfather," Becca said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Thank you for finally acknowledging that I exist." "Of course, my dear," Charles replied smoothly. "Family is everything to the Whitmores. We've been heartbroken by your absence. Heartbroken enough to murder my parents when they tried to expose your crimes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Charles's mask of grandfatherly affection never slipped. "I'm afraid grief and confusion have affected my poor granddaughter," he said, his voice full of practiced sympathy. "Losing one's parents at such a young age, growing up without family support, it can create unfortunate delusions. Delusions backed up by 24 years of evidence," Becca shot back, pulling out a small remote control. "Evidence my parents died trying to preserve." She pressed a button, and every screen in the ballroom, meant to display photos of the Foundation's charitable work, lit up with images from her parents' hidden files. Financial records, recorded conversations, photographs of document destruction. The crowd watched in horrified silence as Charles Whitmore's voice filled the room, casually discussing fraud and murder. "These files contain everything," Becca announced. 24 years of financial crimes, bribery, witness intimidation, and murder, all orchestrated by the man you're honoring tonight. The same man who killed my parents and tried to kill me." Charles's composure finally cracked. The grandfatherly facade fell away, revealing the cold-blooded killer beneath. "Enough," he snarled, lunging toward Becca, but he never reached her. FBI agents poured into the ballroom from every entrance, led by Agent David Harrison, who'd been building a financial crimes case against Whitmore Holdings for 8 years. "Charles Whitmore," Agent Harrison announced, his badge glinting under the crystal chandeliers. "You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, financial fraud, and approximately 70 other federal charges." As they led him away in handcuffs, Charles turned back to Becca, his eyes blazing with decades of suppressed hatred. "You think this ends it?" he called out. "You think you've won? I have judges, politicians, half the state in my pocket. I'll be free in a week and you'll be dead. In 2. Maybe," Becca replied calmly, "but everyone here tonight knows the truth now. And tomorrow, the whole world will see what the Whitmore name really represents." She touched the emerald hairpin, its green fire catching the light like captured. "Hope, this was supposed to be my inheritance, grandfather. But I'm giving it back to the victims your family destroyed, along with every penny of your blood money." The trials took 5 years, but justice ultimately prevailed. Charles and Margaret Whitmore were convicted on over 80 federal charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. They died behind bars within a year of each other, their empire dismantled and their assets seized to compensate their victims. Becca inherited what remained of her parents' estate, a modest sum compared to what had been lost to legal fees and restitution. But she used every penny to honor their memory, establishing the David and Rebecca Parker Foundation for Financial Justice, dedicated to helping victims of white-collar crime and exposing corporate corruption. She kept Dorothy's farm, but transformed it into something new, a refuge for children aging out of foster care, teaching them sustainable farming and providing them with the family support she'd been lucky enough to find with Dorothy. On the day the refuge opened, Becca stood on the porch where she'd spent so many evenings with her foster mother, watching children from the city discover the magic of fireflies and fresh air. Robert Chen found her there, looking out over fields where corn and hope were growing in equal measure. "Any regrets?" he asked. Becca touched the simple silver locket at her throat. She'd replaced the ornate emerald hairpin with a piece containing photos of Dorothy and her birth parents, the 3 people who'd shaped her life. "None," she said firmly. "My parents died, trying to stop financial predators from destroying families. Dorothy gave her life to protect me. I won't let their sacrifices be meaningless." "And what about your future? You could go anywhere now, do anything." Becca smiled, watching a 10-year-old city kid chase chickens around the yard. "I know exactly what I want to do. I want to make sure no other child grows up not knowing where they came from, or wondering if they have family who loves them." "Your parents would be proud," Chen said softly. "All 3 of them would," Becca agreed, "and that's all I need." Becca's transformation from struggling waitress to crusader for justice proves that truth, no matter how deeply buried beneath. Decades of lies and cover-ups has a power that no amount of wealth or influence can suppress. Her story reminds us that heroes don't always emerge from places of privilege. Sometimes they rise from roadside diners and farmhouse porches, armed with nothing but courage and the determination to honor those who came before. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the strength to fight for what's right and the wisdom to transform pain into purpose. Rebecca Parker became Rebecca Whitmore, not to claim a fortune, but to reclaim her family's honor and ensure that their fight for justice would continue for generations to come. If this story of courage triumphing over corruption moved you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of truth over power. What would you have done in Becca's place? Stayed hidden and safe, or risked everything to expose the family that destroyed your parents? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that prove justice may be delayed, but it's never truly denied.